I'm Maggie Hollingsworth, and I'm 43 years old. Last Christmas, at my parents' dining table in suburban Detroit, my younger sister Natalie stood up in front of 20 relatives, raised her wine glass, and called me a loser who never amounted to anything. The room went silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. My mother's smile froze on her face. My father looked down at his plate. Natalie stood there, beautiful and confident in her designer dress, waiting for someone to laugh at her joke. Nobody did. But nobody defended me either. I sat there, hands trembling around my napkin, feeling every eye on me. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stared at my sister and thought about all the things she didn't know about me. All the secrets I'd kept to protect our family. 3 weeks later, she showed up at my apartment, mascara running down her face, begging me to save her from the disaster I'd seen coming for months. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Every share helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going. The Christmas dinner had been my mother's idea. She'd insisted everyone come, even though half the family hadn't spoken in months. My sister Natalie arrived late, as always, sweeping through the door with her husband Kenneth trailing behind her. Kenneth worked in private equity, whatever that meant. Natalie worked in luxury real estate, selling mansions to people who owned 3 houses already. They lived in a 6,000 square foot home in Birmingham, drove matching BMWs, and never let anyone forget it. I'd arrived early to help my mother cook, wearing jeans and a sweater Natalie would probably mock later. I worked from home doing financial compliance consulting. Boring work, she always said. Nothing glamorous. Just spreadsheets and regulations and making sure companies didn't break laws they didn't know existed. During dinner, Natalie dominated conversation. She talked about closing a $2 million sale, about her upcoming vacation to Turks and Caicos. Then she looked at me. Maggie's been so quiet tonight, Natalie said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. Tell everyone what you've been up to. Still working on your little computer projects at home. I felt my stomach tighten. I'm doing compliance work for several corporate clients, I said carefully. She laughed, that tinkling sound she'd perfected in high school. Right. The compliance thing. So basically, you're unemployed but with extra steps. A few cousins shifted uncomfortably. Natalie, my father said weakly. She ignored him. I mean, look at us, Maggie. I'm selling $1 million properties. Kenneth's managing investment portfolios. You're 43 years old, single, living in that tiny apartment, doing freelance work that nobody understands. When are you going to get a real job? A real life? The silence that followed felt like drowning. She raised her glass. To family. Even the ones who never quite figured it out. I stood up slowly and walked to the bathroom. Nobody followed me. I sat in my parents' bathroom for 15 minutes, hands shaking, replaying Natalie's words. This wasn't new. She'd been dismissing me our entire lives. When I got my accounting degree, she'd said it was boring. When I chose consulting over corporate work, she'd called it a cop-out. When I bought my modest condo, she'd asked why I didn't aim higher. She was the successful one. The pretty one. The one who married well and lived the life our parents bragged about to their friends. I was the disappointment. The quiet sister who did weird work nobody understood. Except that wasn't the whole truth. What Natalie didn't know, what I'd never told anyone, was that I'd been supporting our parents financially for 7 years. Their retirement savings had disappeared in bad investments. I'd been paying their mortgage, their medical bills, everything. Quietly. Anonymously. Letting them keep their dignity. Letting Natalie keep believing her perfect image of our perfect family. I drove home alone that night, Christmas lights blurring past my windows. The humiliation burned in my chest, but something else burned hotter. Anger. Not the explosive kind. The cold, calculating kind. Natalie had humiliated me because it made her feel powerful, because putting me down elevated her in comparison. She'd done it publicly, viciously, at a family gathering where I couldn't defend myself without causing a scene. But what hurt most wasn't the insult itself. It was the erasure. I'd quietly held our family together while she took credit for being the successful daughter. I'd worked 70-hour weeks to build a career she didn't respect. I'd sacrificed relationships and experiences to make sure our parents could retire with dignity. And she'd reduced all of it to little computer projects. Fine. If she wanted to see me as nothing, I'd let her. Until the moment she desperately needed me to be something. The first crack appeared 4 days after Christmas. I'd stopped by my parents' house to drop off groceries I'd paid for but pretended they'd bought themselves. Natalie was there, pacing in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was sharp, panicked. I don't care what the timeline is. This needs to be handled now. Do you understand? Now. She saw me and immediately switched tones, smiling brightly. I have to call you back. She hung up and hugged me like Christmas dinner had never happened. Maggie, so good to see you. How've you been? I set the groceries down. Fine. You? She waved her hand dismissively. Busy. You know how it is. Kenneth's firm is expanding. We're looking at properties in Aspen. Life is insane. But her eyes were wrong. Too bright. Too desperate. Her hands trembled slightly when she reached for her coffee cup. Something was falling apart behind that perfect facade. And I recognized the signs. What Natalie didn't know about me, what almost nobody knew, was that my boring compliance work made me very good at spotting financial disasters before they happened. I specialized in regulatory compliance for investment firms and real estate companies. I reviewed contracts, audited financial practices, identified red flags that could trigger federal investigations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was powerful. Over 20 years, I'd developed a reputation in certain circles. Companies hired me to make sure they weren't accidentally breaking securities laws or violating federal regulations. I'd prevented millions in fines. I'd saved careers. I'd identified fraud schemes before they destroyed companies. And I'd learned to recognize the specific kind of panic that came with knowing you were under investigation. Natalie had that panic written all over her face. The overly bright smile. The forced cheerfulness. The trembling hands. I'd seen it dozens of times. She was in trouble. Big trouble. 2 days later, my mother called. Maggie, something strange happened. A letter came to the house for Natalie. Certified mail. She turned completely white when she saw it. My pulse quickened. What was the return address? My mother read it off. I recognized it immediately. Securities and Exchange Commission. My stomach dropped. This was worse than I'd thought. The SEC didn't send certified letters for minor issues. This was serious. She wouldn't tell us what it was about, my mother continued. She just grabbed it and left. Kenneth looked furious. They were arguing in the driveway. I told my mother not to worry, that it was probably routine. But it wasn't routine. The SEC investigating your spouse's firm was the kind of problem that destroyed families. I could help her. I had contacts at the SEC. I understood the process. I could guide her through what was coming. But I didn't call her. Not yet. I wanted to see how long it would take for her to realize she needed me. A week after Christmas, we had a family brunch. Natalie showed up late again, this time without Kenneth. She looked tired, her makeup unable to hide the dark circles under her eyes. But she smiled anyway, laughing loudly at our cousin's jokes, pretending everything was perfect. Until she looked at me. Maggie, still doing your little consulting thing? She asked, her voice dripping with condescension. Must be nice having so much free time. No real responsibilities. I took a sip of coffee. Actually, I've been pretty busy. Several new clients. Compliance work for investment firms. She laughed. Right. Because nothing says exciting career like spreadsheets and regulations. God, I'd rather die than do work that boring. I smiled. It has its moments. You'd be surprised how powerful understanding federal securities law can be. Something flickered in her eyes. Fear. Quick and bright. Then gone. She changed the subject immediately, talking about a mansion she'd just listed. But she'd heard me, and she was starting to understand. That night, I got a call from an old colleague, Thomas Brennan. He worked at the SEC's Enforcement Division. Maggie, I need a favor. Off the record. I leaned back in my chair. What kind of favor? He explained they were investigating a private equity firm for securities violations. Specifically, They suspected the firm had been misrepresenting investment risks to clients and hiding losses through creative accounting. They needed someone who understood both the technical violations and the real estate connections. Someone who could review documentation quickly and identify patterns. "Can you take a look at some files?" he asked. "Give us your professional opinion." I agreed before he even mentioned the firm's name. But I already knew. Kenneth's firm. My sister's husband was being investigated for fraud, and they just asked me to help build the case. I stayed up all night reviewing the documents Thomas sent. What I found was damning. Kenneth's firm had been lying to investors for at least 3 years. The evidence was clear, documented, impossible to deny. News of the investigation broke quietly in financial industry publications the next day. Most people wouldn't notice, but people in investment circles would. I watched my phone waiting. Natalie didn't call. 3 days passed. I went about my work, taking calls from other clients, reviewing contracts, living my quiet, boring life. Then, on the 4th day, I saw her car in my apartment building's parking lot. She was sitting in the driver's seat, staring at nothing. I walked past slowly. She didn't notice me. Her face was streaked with tears, her hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left in her world. Part of me wanted to knock on her window, to offer help immediately. But a harder part of me, the part that still burned from Christmas dinner, kept walking. She'd come to me when she was desperate enough. And she'd remember every word she'd said about my irrelevant, boring, meaningless work. That night, my doorbell rang at 11 p.m. I opened it to find Natalie standing there, makeup smeared, designer coat buttoned wrong. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. "Can I come in?" she whispered. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, looking around my apartment like she was seeing it for the first time. The small living room. The secondhand furniture. The wall of books on compliance law and financial regulations. She sat on my couch and stared at her hands. "I need to ask you something," she said finally. "But I don't know how." I sat across from her waiting. She looked up, her eyes red and desperate. "You do compliance work, right? For financial companies." I nodded. "What do you know about SEC investigations?" "Everything," I thought. But I said, "Enough." "Why?" She started crying again, huge gasping sobs that shook her whole body. "Kenneth's firm is being investigated. They think he broke laws. They're freezing accounts. His partners are turning on him. Everything's falling apart." I handed her tissues and let her cry. When she finally calmed down, I asked the questions I already knew the answers to. How long had she known? 2 months. Why hadn't she said anything? Pride. Fear. Denial. Had Kenneth actually broken laws? She didn't know. Maybe. Probably. The firm had been aggressive with investments, hiding losses, promising returns they couldn't guarantee. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "Our savings are tied up in the firm. The house might be at risk. Everyone's talking about us. Friends won't return my calls." I sat quietly, watching her fall apart. This was the woman who'd called me a loser 3 weeks ago. Who'd mocked my career, my life, my choices. Who'd humiliated me in front of our entire family. Now she sat in my tiny apartment, begging for help she didn't even know how to ask for. "What do you need from me?" I asked. She looked up, hope and desperation fighting across her face. "Can you help? Do you know anyone who could make this better?" I could have told her the truth right then. That I'd already reviewed the case files. That I knew exactly how bad things were. That her husband's firm had committed multiple federal violations and the investigation was just beginning. Instead, I said, "Maybe. But I need to understand the situation better. Can you get me documentation?" She nodded frantically. "Yes. Anything. Whatever you need." I wrote down a list of documents. Financial statements. Client agreements. Internal communications. She promised to get everything. Before she left, she turned at the door. "Maggie, I'm sorry about Christmas." About what I said. I was drunk and stupid and cruel. I looked at her carefully. "Are you apologizing because you're sorry, or because you need my help?" She flinched. "Both. I think." I nodded. "Get me those documents. We'll talk after I review them." She left, And I sat in my quiet apartment, thinking about power and humiliation and the strange paths that lead to justice. Over the next week, Natalie delivered documents. Boxes of them. Financial records, client files, internal emails. I reviewed everything systematically, building a complete picture of Kenneth's firm. What I found was worse than the SEC knew. The firm hadn't just misrepresented risks. They'd created shell companies to hide losses. They'd forged client signatures. They'd moved money between accounts to create the illusion of returns that didn't exist. This wasn't aggressive investing. This was fraud. Systematic, deliberate fraud. Kenneth was going to lose everything. His license, his reputation, possibly his freedom. And Natalie, as his wife, would lose everything too. The house, the cars, the lifestyle she'd built her identity around. I could help her. I knew exactly how to navigate SEC investigations. I had contacts who could guide her through cooperation agreements, asset protection, legal strategy. But helping her meant saving her from consequences she'd earned by looking the other way while her husband committed crimes. It meant rescuing someone who'd spent years treating me like I was worthless. Natalie called me every day, sometimes twice a day, asking if I'd found anything, if there was hope, if I could fix this. I gave her vague answers. Still reviewing. It's complicated. I need more time. The truth was, I'd finish my review in 3 days. I was stalling. Watching her panic grow. Watching her perfect life crumble piece by piece. Kenneth's partners started abandoning the firm. Investors filed complaints. The local business community, which had celebrated Kenneth as a rising star, now whispered about fraud and investigations. Natalie stopped posting on social media. Stopped going to her social clubs. Her real estate sales dried up as clients distanced themselves from the scandal. 2 weeks after Christmas, she showed up at my apartment again. This time she didn't pretend. She didn't make small talk. She walked in, sat down, and said, "I know why you're stalling. And I deserve it." I raised my eyebrows. "Do you?" Natalie looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Humility. "I've been terrible to you our entire lives. I made fun of your career, your choices, everything about you. I did it because putting you down made me feel successful by comparison." She twisted her hands together. "Christmas dinner was the worst. I humiliated you in front of everyone because I was already panicking about Kenneth's situation, and tearing you down made me feel powerful again, like I still had control." I sat silently, letting her words fill the room. "You've been supporting Mom and Dad for years, haven't you?" she continued. "I figured it out last week. They couldn't afford that house on Dad's pension. You've been paying their mortgage, their bills, everything." I nodded slowly. 7 years. She closed her eyes. "And I called you a loser. God, Maggie. I'm so sorry. I'm genuinely, completely sorry. Not because I need your help, though I do, but because you deserve better from me. Always." For the first time, I believed her. Not because her words were pretty, but because they came without excuses. She wasn't justifying her behavior or minimizing the damage. She was just acknowledging the truth. "Do you want to know what I found in Kenneth's files?" I asked. She nodded, face pale. I laid it out. Every violation. Every forged document. Every lie to investors. She listened without interrupting, her face growing whiter with each revelation. "He's going to prison, isn't he?" she whispered. "Probably. The evidence is overwhelming." She started crying again, but differently this time. Not panic sobbing. Just quiet tears of someone watching their entire world collapse. "Can you help me?" she asked. "Not him. Me. I didn't know what he was doing. I can prove that. But I need someone who understands this nightmare to guide me through it." I could. The question was whether I would. Whether forgiveness meant rescuing her or teaching her that actions have consequences. I made my decision that night. I would help Natalie, but not the way she wanted. Not by making the problems disappear or protecting her from consequences. I would help her do things the right way. The hard way. The way that might actually teach her something. "I'll help you," I told her the next morning. "But on my terms." She nodded quickly. "Anything." I laid out my conditions. full cooperation with the SEC investigation, complete transparency about any knowledge she had of Kenneth's activities, separation of her assets from his, honest accounting of everything they owned and how they'd acquired it. This won't be quick or easy, I warned. You'll probably lose the house, the cars, most of your lifestyle. Kenneth will face criminal charges. The process will be public and humiliating. She swallowed hard. But I'll survive it. If you do exactly what I tell you when I tell you, yes. You'll survive it. She agreed. That afternoon I made calls. To lawyers I trusted. To contacts at the SEC. To financial advisors who specialized in asset protection during federal investigations. The next 3 weeks were brutal. I walked Natalie through cooperation with investigators. Helped her hire a lawyer who specialized in innocent spouse cases. Guided her through the process of legally separating her assets from Kenneth's before they could be seized. Kenneth fought her every step. He wanted her to present a united front, to lie to investigators, to help him hide remaining assets. I advised her to refuse everything. The only way through this is complete honesty, I told her. Anything less and you go down with him. She listened. For the first time in her life, she trusted my judgment over her own instincts. The process was expensive. She had to sell the house, the cars, most of her jewelry. She moved into a small apartment not unlike mine. Got a job at a regular real estate office instead of her luxury firm. Lived on a budget for the first time in her adult life. Our parents watched in shock as their golden daughter fell from grace. One afternoon, my mother called me to their house. Both parents sat at the kitchen table, looking older than I'd ever seen them. We need to talk to you about something, my father said quietly. We figured out that you've been helping us financially. For years. I started to deflect, but he held up his hand. We also figured out that you've been doing it anonymously, letting us think we were managing on our own, protecting our pride. My mother's eyes filled with tears. And we watched Natalie humiliate you at Christmas while you carried this family on your shoulders. God, Maggie. We're so sorry. They apologized for an hour. For favoring Natalie. For not seeing my sacrifices. For letting her treat me poorly without consequence. We always thought Natalie was the successful one, my father said. But you've been the strong one all along. The one with real character. It was the validation I'd waited decades to hear. It didn't erase the years of being overlooked. But it helped. Kenneth was indicted on 14 counts of securities fraud. The evidence I'd helped the SEC organize was central to the case. He would eventually plead guilty and serve 6 years in federal prison. His firm collapsed completely. Investors lost millions. But Natalie, because she'd cooperated fully and demonstrated genuine ignorance of his crimes, avoided charges. She lost almost everything material, but she kept her freedom and her professional license. She could rebuild. Slowly, modestly, but genuinely. One evening, she came to my apartment with takeout. We sat on my second-hand couch, eating Chinese food and watching television like normal sisters. I've been thinking, she said during a commercial, about how different our lives turned out from what I expected. I looked at her. Different how? She gestured around my apartment. I thought you were the failure and I was the success. But you built something real. A career based on actual expertise. A life based on helping people. While I built everything on status and appearances and my husband's money, when it collapsed, I had nothing real underneath. For the first time, Natalie apologized without needing anything from me. We sat in my living room, and she looked me in the eye. Christmas dinner was unforgivable. Every mean comment over the years was unforgivable. I can't take any of it back. She paused. But I want you to know I see you now. Really see you. You're brilliant at what you do. You're generous in ways I never was. You held our family together while I took credit. You saved me when you had every right to watch me fall. I thought about forgiveness. Real forgiveness, not the performative kind. I forgive you, I said. Not because you've earned it yet, but because holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts you. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm going to spend the rest of my life being better. Being the sister you deserved. I'll believe it when I see it, I said. But I smiled when I said it. Maybe people could change. Maybe this disaster had finally taught Natalie something real. 6 months after Christmas, my compliance consulting business got a major boost. Word spread about my role in the SEC case. Companies started calling, wanting someone with my expertise and discretion. I hired 2 associates and moved into a real office. Nothing fancy, but professional. Legitimate. My income doubled, then tripled. I finally had the success Natalie had always pretended to respect. But I'd had it all along. Just quietly. Just without the performance. Meanwhile, Natalie rebuilt slowly. She worked regular hours at a normal real estate office. Sold starter homes instead of mansions. Lived within her means. She came to family dinners and listened more than she talked. Asked about my work with genuine interest. Helped our parents without expecting praise. She was becoming, slowly, the person she should have been all along. At a family dinner 6 months later, my father asked my advice about a financial decision. Everyone turned to listen, including Natalie. She smiled at me, a real smile. No competition. No jealousy. Just respect. 1 year after the Christmas dinner disaster, we had another family gathering. Same relatives. Same dining room. Different energy. Natalie arrived early to help cook. She wore normal clothes, drove a modest car, talked about her regular real estate sales without pretension. During dinner, my cousin asked about my business. I explained a recent case, how I'd helped a company avoid major regulatory violations. Maggie's amazing at this stuff, Natalie said. She saved my life this year. Literally guided me through the worst experience imaginable. Everyone looked at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. She meant it. I'm serious, she continued. I was drowning and she threw me a lifeline, even though I'd spent years being awful to her. She helped me anyway. That's real character. My mother squeezed my hand under the table. My father beamed with pride. For the first time in my life, I was the daughter they bragged about. Not because I'd become someone different, but because they'd finally learned to see who I'd always been. If you're reading this and someone in your life has made you feel small, invisible, or worthless, I want you to understand something important. Your worth isn't determined by whether other people recognize it. I spent 43 years being overlooked while I quietly held everything together. My sister's opinion didn't change my value. It just revealed her blindness. When she finally needed me, I could have refused. Could have let her suffer the consequences of underestimating me. Instead, I helped her. Not because she deserved it, but because I'm not the person she thought I was. I'm better than that. Justice doesn't always mean revenge. Sometimes it means showing people who you really are and letting them live with the shame of not seeing it sooner. My sister called me a loser at Christmas dinner. 3 weeks later, she begged for my help. I gave it. On my terms. In my way. And I rose from that experience not because I destroyed her, but because I refused to let her judgment define me. That's real power. Not the performance of success, but the quiet confidence of knowing your own worth. Whether anyone else sees it or not.